Anyway, I'll kick it off. As Barry was saying, I was founding former chair of the Deming Special Interest Group, and A3 came to us as we were thinking about structuring improvement, which is in the, as you'll see in a minute, we'll bring up in ISO 9004, it's referred to. So what it started out as a presentation. This started out as a presentation to the Deming SIG, and I've evolved it since then. So I'm going to kick off now. Well, I would do if I synthesize the screen. Right, okay. So ISO 9001 just says it's a requirement to have continual improvement, and that's your lot. Where 9004 is helpful is that it proposes that you have a structured approach, and in fact applying it across the whole of your processes. The other interesting thing for me is that it suggests that there should be a culture in the organization. I certainly know of situations of companies that I have visited and not actually done business with, where somebody says, oh, improvement, that's somebody down the end of the corridor, there's a label on the door, and that surely isn't the right way to go. Surely it has to come down from the board, as it now says in the standards. So A3, here's one I did earlier. This is a teaching version that I put together to illustrate various points. It is based on some input from an IT company that I know here in the Midlands, but it wasn't their problem, but they put a lot of input into it. So A3 structures improvement, and it encourages a wide, these are the headlines, sorry, I should have said, these are the headlines. It structures improvement, so encourages a wide dialogue and participation by people in the organization in finding a way forward to particular challenges. And having had this higher engagement, it enables buy-in to whatever way forward the project comes up with. My most recent influence has been this book, which was published in the summer this year by Katie Anderson, and it's based on the work of in Toyota of Isao Yoshino. He spent 40 years in Toyota in various roles, fairly senior management towards the end, and so his what can I say, his approach has been moved my feeling, my presentation along a bit more. One of the biggest revelations, should I say, was this phrase from Yoshino, which is about A3 not being a magical tool. The magical tool is actually your brain, but I think that's a really important thing for us all to understand about A3, and I'll expand upon that a bit later. So if you've got opportunities to improve, whether they're to do with performance and quality, or whether they're recurring problems of various types throughout your organization, or perhaps you're offering the products and services that your organization supplies might be slipping behind. There are people problems might need addressing. Often the people problems are to do with leadership and I call it the system, all the interactions in this particular situation, and of course the executive directors don't want to have war and peace presented to them, and if you're reporting on what's happening, if you could do it in 5 minutes, that would be really, really good. So the MD wants answers. This is a classic, or the CEO, whoever you have, he wants answers. And in the case of the example that I've created to demonstrate this, their e-commerce website has issues, and what it's reversed growth. Growth has gone down this 14.59%, and the shareholders, investors, are really not very happy. So I was going to have a bit of interaction here, but I think, bearing in mind the problems I've got with my sound, I'll just go on to say it would be fairly typical for MDs or CEOs to come up with a target, especially a stretch target, in order to solve the problem. Of course, people faced with a target find all sorts of ways of being inventive, which possibly don't solve the problem. So what are we going to do instead? We're going to say, whoa, let's not do that. Let's not have a stretch target. There's a better way. And I'm going to start, first of all, by saying it's A3, but where did A3 come from? I'm going to take you back 40 odd years and to Toyota. They in 1965, Toyota won the Deming Prize for quality, and in the next 10-15 years, the ethos leaked away. My friend, the late Tony Brown, used to say management forgets things every 15 years, and it seemed to be the case in Toyota even. You wouldn't believe that today, fortunately for them. So they introduced what they called the CanPro training program for 1,000 managers in the mid to late 70s, of which A3 was part. A3 is used throughout Toyota to this day, and Yoshino says in Learning to Lead that it was particularly valued in knowledge work within Toyota. So it's not just the production line for making the cars, it's other places as well, was found to be powerful. And the point that Yoshino keeps making in Learning to Lead is that within Toyota, they think about reflection and learning. They don't think about A3 really, they're thinking about reflection and learning. And this is something I think we can take on board. One of the other things that A3 helps us with is scientific thinking. You may be familiar with the Deming Wheel, the Plan, Do, Study, Act. The ISO standard uses PDCA, and Dr. Deming was not very happy with Plan, Do, Check, Act, because he felt that check could be interpreted as a tick in a box, and it is much more than that. It is deep thinking. Scientific thinking has been defined as knowledge from observation of an experiment of real behavior. So we're not doing I've got a feeling that. This is what's actually happening. So here's my example of A3 again, just to really emphasize this point about reflection and learning. When you look at if you compare Japanese planning and versus actual implementation, they are much longer. They do the whole thing shorter than that we do in the West, but their reflection, their planning, their learning at the beginning is much longer than we typically do in the West, and we typically spend much longer trying to put things into action. So supposing you have a need to improve, you've decided that's what's needed in your situation. Unfortunately, there's human nature is going to get in the way. Now I'm just going to run down a list. Just the length of the list is really what I'm showing you. So there's impatience and the affliction of the current US president, narcissistic personality disorder, and there's all these other good things here. I'll come back to cognitive biases, all sorts of human frailties. What's really interesting is last summer I came across this a chart that showed that there were 188 human biases, and there are a whole range of things. Just to give you one example, there's confirmation bias, which when something happens and you say, oh yes, I thought that's what would happen, you're confirming your confirmation isn't necessarily asking questions like, I wonder why that's happening. So bias is a massive problem, and what A3 is doing is helping you to stick to the science of the scientific approach and look for evidence. Facts. So structuring improvement. Oh, let's get on structuring this improvement. Here we are. There's all the 7 quality tools, for example. But is it really your head full of tools that's structuring improvement? I'd suggest not. I suggest it's your head that's the tool, and that the tools, your head uses the tools to help the reflection and learning. So I'm sorry, I'll press that a bit too quick. Anyway, a book I recommend, and it's in the chat, at the top of the chat, is Managing to Learn. It's certainly influenced me a few years back, and it's been around for about a decade, I think 2008, 2009, something like that. And it uses its example based really around, it's a dialogue between the coach and the process owner as they work through learning about, as the process owner works through learning about doing an A3. I'd recommend it to anybody. It's a really good book. And according to John Shook, and just a word about Shook, he was the first American hired under the NUMMI program that Toyota did in America jointly with General Motors, and then he spent some time in Japan. So there's very few people who know more than John Shook in terms of Americans about lean and about particularly A3. So what Shook says is it's a thought process, as we've already been discussing. It's about improvement and problem solving, continual dialogue. Think of it as a management process that should be everywhere in the organization. And again, reinforcing its learning by scientific method. So how do we position this A3 report in an organization and its environment? There's the reflection and learning, there's the coaching process, and this leads to an A3 report. So really emphasizing the thinking, reflection and learning, but the coaching process is how you do it. But it's really, really, really important that it becomes the part of the culture of the organization, whether that's in the public, private, or not-for-profit. Otherwise, it's just another tool. It should be collaborative, and giving you the report that comes out at the end gives the project owner the tool with which to draw the contributions from the workplace and to make a case to management. So we're talking about a coaching relationship as a central part of making a success of A3. The coach is going to be challenging the project owner to ensure that they consult widely and engage people. there's going to be, I think it's really important, as I pretend to be a systems thinker, I just feel that understanding the context is really, really important. If you don't understand the whole situation, as it's once been called, then you're missing something. Another important factor is for the coach to ensure that a proper risk evaluation has been done. Otherwise, all the good work can be wasted and perhaps even cause a disaster. It's used if the coaching relationship has been successful, it means that the problem owner, the project owner, can have a case to put towards senior management if they want to make a request for funding or making significant changes in the organization. So this relationship is critical to getting the most out of A3. And equally, balancing that relationship is the relationship that the problem owner is going to have with the people in the workplace. And the classic go to see, or some people call it go to Gemba, is absolutely essential. The people in the workplace, the people facing the problem, are the ones who really know what's happening. They really know the impact. They really know the factors involved. So go to see is base one. And as the illustration is suggesting, the wide dialogue and participation of people is critical, and it has a benefit because it leads to higher engagement and buy-in to the final way forward. So meanwhile, back at Plan, Do, Study, Act, I'm possibly teaching people to suck eggs here, but study is about what is happening. Act is to act on what you've learned. It could be act, adapt, adjust, or abandon, maybe, depending on what's found in the study phase. But hopefully you've found a way forward, and you plan to implement that and then move on to run a trial. Having run the trial, we're going to go back to study. So we've got this one-page storyboard, which is based on the Study, Act, Plan, Do. I think you'll find, if you look in the number of books on A3, that a lot of people just rigidly stick to Plan, Do, Study, Act, or Plan, Do, Check, Act, and start with the left-hand side saying that's plan. And I think that underplays the scientific thinking side. So I suggest that we start at study. But before I just go into the detail of that, just to make one important point here, that a lot of people get fixed ideas about the format of the A3. Take all the frameworks you see as a guide. If your particular issue that you're trying to resolve doesn't quite fit that, then change the A3. The point is the reflection, the learning, and the effective action that you take. So, I'm sorry, hit the wrong button. This is just an example that I've lifted directly from the Toyota Way field book that Jeff Leiker has given an illustration of 4 of these types of storyboard that you can have. This first one is the sort that would probably be submitted to senior management to authorize a fairly big program. Then there's the classic problem-solving story, a status story of a project that's running, And then finally, there's what he calls an info story, relating the whole story of a project. So I'm going to this is the building blocks of an A3, which many of you may be familiar with, and I've aligned that with study. So we've got a title, background, the current situation, what's happening there, and the goal. Personally, I suggest that one doesn't use the word target, and you'll see what I'll do more deeply, go more deeply into that later on. And then the really critical phase of root cause analysis. Why is what you see happening, and in fact, some cases, what you think you see happening? Then you lead to propose countermeasures, and then implementing a plan and following it up. And then that's the close of the circle, and you may at that point start another A3 if you can see potential for further changes. So here we are in this worked example that I've come up with, the showing examples, and the idea is, as far as possible, using visual cues to get the message across to people. I'm not going to stick with that. An important point I want to make about it is a dynamic document. You don't go straight to this, and John Shook in his book actually shows the example of the new person to A3 going straight in and filling out the whole form. Trust me, it's not like that, and it's much better to work one box at a time between the coach and the problem owner, really digging down and looking at what's happening there. So it's a dynamic document. Oh, sorry, I keep pressing the wrong button. Here's an example from John Shook's book showing how you might be working on the current conditions over here on the left, and you might come up with your goal. Then on the right, we were looking at the analysis, which might take up a good part of the whole of the right-hand side initially as you start to dig down into the analysis. But after time, you'll resolve that and be starting to move into countermeasures. And we'll dig into that a bit more in a bit later. Hello, it's right, here we go. The countermeasures part of it is not how can I say, it isn't something that you should just have one answer to. I think it's important that you should have at least two options, and in fact, as we'll see later, I think it's something that's worth brainstorming with the people who've been involved in creating the earliest parts of the A3. So what I'm going to do now is quickly run through to the end. I'll just quickly run through the various stages about how you create the A3. So title, and you come up with something like online sales of our mythical e-commerce website. That's fairly straightforward, but the background, why are you dealing with this? What's the business case for it, and what's the business need? Does it fit with strategy deployment? Ideally, you work with 2 points in background, but perhaps up to 4. I've got 3 here because I use this for teaching. So we would hope you would see that the first 2 items could probably be summarized together. Moving on, current situation. I've used what some people call a control chart, or I prefer Don Wheeler's process behavior chart. It tells the story in one picture. And as far as possible, if you can do that in an A3, you speed up people's perception of the issue. Go to C. Ask the people on the site, on the ground, what's happening. Have you got facts and data? I've used some variable data, some highly variable data here. What can you get? And is there a gap to what you expect or what you desire that's going to be driving? I don't have to write pages about what's happening. There's one picture that gets that message across. And as far as possible, make it visual. So what I was saying earlier about I don't like the word targets, because people get fixated, and it's known that people do have three choices with a target. They could try and work towards it, but the other two choices are fiddling the system and fiddling the numbers are all too common, I'm afraid. A goal is, to me, represents it much better. Be brief and clear, and ideally if you can get it across in one bullet point, that would be great. So here we are. I've got two here which could be integrated as part of an exercise, bringing the sales back within the boundaries and in learning from the previous high performance points. So root cause analysis, this is where the real brain work's going to go on, and detective work. 5 whys is a common solution in this area, or way forward on this area, sorry. But what visual analysis can you do? Can you use a Pareto, Ishikawa, or Fishbone, and the rest of the 7 quality tools? You might also think of the 7 new management tools. And again, use bullet points in the root cause analysis. So we've got a Pareto there and a simulation of a fishbone, and some root causes bullet pointed at the bottom. Now I'm just going to say a word about countermeasures. As it says there, it's a system. When you look at the real world, if you're a systems thinker, you realize that it's like having a balloon or a balloon full of water. If you squeeze it at one point, the balloon expands in another point. What you're not sure of when you make a change to the system is what all the unexpected consequences are going to be. So the word countermeasures makes that clear, that you're not certain of what's going to happen. You've got a good basis for it, but you need to be on the lookout for what's actually happening. And there's a set here where we're using new staff to work on the digital marketing, and recruit as temporary staff, and then going on to permanent staff, etc., etc. So be methodical, and for example, have a brainstorming session, and again involve the people you've been talking to in the front line on the side of the problem. It's often helpful to use a decision matrix to decide which is the most powerful way forward, and again do a risk analysis. Who does what, where, when, why, who? What measures of progress? What measures of progress can you have? You should be, for me, you should be running data in real time on your systems, whatever they are, whether they're in manufacturing or whether they're in service industry. Get some numbers on it to get some objective data if you can. Obviously, most people will be familiar with a Gantt chart, but you put the word simple in there to say no problem's too simple, really, to have a Gantt chart on. I think it makes sure that you have thought about the relationships, which is going to, the relationships between various activities, and minimizes time wasting. And you might need, as here I put in some instructions at the top, just as an example of what you might do. So follow up the next steps, because it's an info story. We've actually got a graph up before and after that shows before and after the change, and some next steps at the bottom there. This has gone all to the English-speaking market, and the follow-up next steps might be China and the Spanish speaking world, which is growing and quite large, in fact. So if there are some anticipated issues, they need logging. You ought to be aware that this might be just the first step, or a step in a spiral of increasing knowledge of Study, Act, Plan, Do. And the really critical point is to use it to capture and share knowledge with people in the organization. Don't sit on it and hide it. As I say, this is and if there is an info story, what happened? Are there some reactions to what happened that are worth recording? And I think that an important thing about this is that you can use the A3s as part of knowledge management, and providing a reference for people to come back to in the future. So the A3 process structures improvement. It's visual communication, not only with the management later on, but early on, it's sharing the information that's picked up as you look at various aspects of a particular issue. There might be the service provision area, there might be a purchasing area that's involved, there might be even suppliers involved. But the visual communication, everybody can get it fairly quickly. And the dialogue that you engage in helps to build engagement throughout the organization, which is going to help you in the longer term. It should, for me, it should be a basic management process, and by the building of these blocks within the A3, it enables the coach to monitor progress and helps the problem owner in themselves to understand how far they are through the program. And going back to dear old Yoshino again, what can you learn from mistakes? If it doesn't work, be upfront about it. What can you learn from that exercise? So the point of the A3 process itself is the science, and there I'm not going to read that out. You can read that quicker than I can say it. But it's about the real world and observation. I call it SAPDO, somewhat influenced by Honda, actually, who call it CAPDO. But for me, the real critical thing is this word study, which Dr. Deming was so keen on. It's about, as we know, it's about improvement and problem solving. But at the end of the day, reflecting and learning are critical to A, doing it, and B, the success that you're going to have. So basically, it's over to you. Do more of it if you're already using A3, but keep it concise and moving. One of the dangers is that it can, as I've seen, that it can get stuck, and keeping it moving is a really important thing. If you haven't been using it, give it a try. It might be easier than you think. So Thank you very much for your attention. I'm a bit 5 minutes over, but thank you for your attention. And if you've got any questions, please put them in the chat. Over to you, Barry.
I think Barry's here. Sorry, worried that you've gone, Barry.
Sorry, I was having trouble with getting myself off of mute then for some reason.
Okay.
Alan, thanks for that very interesting presentation. And we have some questions. Can you hear me okay, Alan? Alan?
Yes, thank you. Yes, I can.
That's it, yeah. Great. Okay, so we have a few questions. So the first is from James Millett, and he asks, how do you ensure that you get buy-in from a functional team?
Sorry about that. I just unmuted myself. How do you get buy-in? I know I don't want it to sound simple, over simple, but it's actually asking open questions. Actually, the problem owner is being coached by usually either by their manager or possibly by an external coach, but they need to have a coach's head on when they go and talk to the people when they go see. And frankly, actually being open to those, certainly I found it first years ago, I found it very hard to be open and say, oh, what do you think about doing so and so? But actually changing that, it was very hard to say, okay, well, so tell me about that. And using the what do you think? The two questions that are really powerful are what and how, what and how. And how do you see that playing out? And those sort of questions are a way forward. Does that help, James?
Hopefully. I have the next question. If you don't define the problem statement accurately at the start, does this impact on root cause, outcomes, or findings discovered? Can preconceived biases by team members alter the findings negatively? And that's from Martin Searson.
Yes, Martin. I think, yeah, I think you're right there. It is a challenge, but once again, it comes down to the coaching mindset, and it's a dynamic document. There's nothing to stop you going back if you later in the process discover that you haven't got quite the handle on the current situation. Change it. I mean, I think this is one of the changes in mindset is we're not looking for people to be perfect straight off. I think it's a case of when the problem owner sees somebody appears to have a preconceived bias, is to keep asking the coaching questions in order to help them take a wider view. Certainly there will be negative views.
Thanks. Neil Hilton's asked a similar question about how do you stop bias giving you the wrong answers due to assumptions being made through the process. So how do you, I'm going to sort of ask my own question on top of that. Say, how do you know that someone has given you the wrong answers due to bias?
You clearly you don't, and I think the important thing is to actually talk to a wide variety of people as is practical in order to find out what the situation is. I think just going and talking to one person, I mean, in any situation, within an organisation, in any process, there are highly likely to be some sort of supplier, if you like, possibly of information to somebody who's doing a process and somebody who's receiving the outcomes of perhaps processed information. And by talking to it, the beginning, middle, and the end, if you like, you begin to get perhaps a bigger picture.
Yeah. And I know here that Peter Leeson has said biases and mental models always play a major role in both the findings and recommendations. The worst is probably the oft-repeated, you can't propose that. They will never accept it. A3 is an education tool rather than training or analysis tool. Would you agree with that, Alan?
No, not all of it. I think it is a learning tool. I don't think it. If you focus on the problem owner focuses on being more of a coach and trying to understand where people are coming from, then that starts to feel more like a collaboration and participation rather than going and telling people. I think it's very, what can I say? It's very different to the way we work in many organisations in the UK and in the West.
Thanks. Alan Hodges says, I like the idea that